So where do we begin, or where do we start? There's so much to tell about my story in so many different aspects. I guess overall, how I'll begin to tell you the story is I grew up in a town in Westchester County called Yonkers. That's where I was born. My family and I moved around a bit when I was a kid, especially when I turned 6. We moved to Elizabeth, New Jersey, which people will be like, oh my gosh, you lived in New Jersey for like 2 hot seconds, and then left. But I lived in New Jersey for like 2 hot seconds, moved back to New York, grew up in Yonkers, Westchester County, northern part of New York City. It's honestly, drive from Westchester to New York City is like 20 minutes. And like any kid, grew up with 2 parents in love, and eventually that happened where they got separated, they got divorced, and I grew up in a single mom household. My dad moved away to the Dominican Republic. I lived my life pretty much as a normal kid, except under a lot of toxic behaviors, not understanding relationships, not understanding how to love, not understanding how to receive love. My mom was very tough with me and my sisters growing up. She didn't have it easy. Now as an adult, like, you come to a realization like, man, like, she didn't have it easy. As a single mom, she did the best that she could, but it was hard because a lot of those things that you deal with as a kid also grows with you, or not grows with you, but necessarily follows you into your adulthood. And it has taken a lot of time to come to realization of things from my past that it's like, oh man, like, I thought I let that go, or I thought I forgave that. And now I am 34 and really coming to terms and peace with a lot of things that I thought I healed from that I didn't. And it really stems mostly from that. But overall, I love both of my parents. My dad is like my best friend. He did the best that he could from a distance. You know, he wanted to save the marriage. From his side of the story, he wanted to save the marriage. I don't really know too many details from my mom's side of the story, because I think parents try to protect us, right, from those details. But from what I understood is that my dad did want to try to restore and heal the relationship. And I didn't know that until I was old enough to have those conversations with my dad. And long story short, I had this idea of what relationship looked like. Broken, messed up, constantly fighting. My mom and dad were very verbal towards each other when I was a kid, and my dad was physically abusive towards my mom. And so seeing that as a kid growing up was very hard for any child to see from the back end. And I didn't understand. I honestly didn't understand why the relationship was like that, or why we couldn't be a happy family. And I would see so many other kids my age living this beautiful life of a happy married couple, not understanding the details until I got older. And coming to my teens, I am at the point where I'm starting to understand my feelings, my emotions. I'm maturing, and really trying to navigate my youth and understand who I'm becoming as a woman, but also understanding like where my relationship is. And this is also to go back, which I completely forgot to mention. I grew up Catholic. So I got baptized when I was 10, because in our culture, you technically get baptized when you're a baby. I don't know why I didn't get baptized when I was a baby, but I got baptized when I was 10. And then my mom put us in Sunday school. So me and my sister, we would go to Sunday school every single week, and we would go to Saturday Mass with my grandparents. So that was like our week, like religion contribution, I think, that we would do as a family week to week. Once I was old enough to be in the 1st grade, my mom, between the 1st and 2nd grade, me and my sister were both in a Catholic school. So for 2 years, we were in Catholic school. My mom then came to terms that it's like, okay, maybe Catholic school is not ideal for my kids, removed us and put us in public school. Needless to say, faith was a foundation in my childhood. The moment my parents divorced when I was 12, I basically was very angry at God. I was like, I want to be with my dad. I don't want to live with my mom. And my dad was like, you have to live with your mom. You have to stay with your mom. And I remember just blaming God. Like, it's like, oh, like if you're such a good father, if you love me so well, like you wouldn't have allowed this to happen. Like, why would you do this to my family, you know? So needless to say, that was really what pushed me away from church. I started thinking that Bible was written by man, and so because it was written by man, it wasn't really God's word, you know? I started believing things like, you know, why is it that I have to confess my sins to a priest? Why is it that I'm constantly being judged by the church? You know, the church is supposed to be a safe space, but I'm being told how to dress, and I'm being told what to say and not what to do, and like all these rules and regulations of what are called the 10 Commandments, you know? And so long story short, like I felt like this pressure of a kid of feeling like there was more of me wanting of love and compassion and grace, but I didn't know how to receive that just because of my dynamic of different relationships. And so when now I'm in my teenage years, I knew that God was always a part of my life in this process. And I would think of him from time to time, but I was still living a very worldly life. And my worldly life, to some people, were like, oh wow, you actually lived a pretty decent life. You know, for example, no one knows this, but I feel like I am in a space that I can actually talk about it for the very first time publicly. I was sexually abused when I was 16, and that changed my trajectory on relationships, honestly, for as long as I can remember. I was quote unquote, as society would say, I was the goody two shoes of my family. Did everything by the book, followed the rules. Asis didn't break a rule because she was too afraid of her parents punishing her. And that was literally how I lived my life, confined to a jail cell, like as what I would call it, but honestly overprotection of my mom, because my dad really wasn't around to be there for those things. For the first time ever in my life, I was just like growing into a teenager, didn't have any breathing room to be myself. And so I was like, oh, I'm gonna spend the night at my friend's house and end up, you know, going to her whole family's house for Christmas, and, you know, which she knew my friend from high school. It was like a half truth, right? Where it's like, yes, I'm sleeping over my friends, but not in, you know, 15 minutes radius from you, if not 2 hours away, in a different state. And let's just say that there was someone there of her relatives that thought I was wasted, or because I was emotional, because I desired so much to be around my family and the way that she was around her family, and how her grandparents loved her, and all of these things that, you know, spare you all the details, but it happened while we were sleeping. And and so it took a lot of time to heal from that, and it took a lot of time to not blame myself, because immediately my immediate reaction is, it's my fault because I lied to my mom. It is my fault because I decided to tell half truth for the first time ever in my life. And that's a scary thing, right? Because I think majority of people that go through these situations are women, mostly women. I feel like guys too, but it's a majority of women that it's like we immediately blame ourselves. And we have to realize that in all actuality, it's not your fault. Like, yeah, it took a lot of healing through that, is just to say. After that situation, I was in a relationship with someone, ended up breaking off the relationship after a year and a half, just because mentally I wasn't in a good space. I wasn't healthy after that. And so he took it very personal. It got kind of aggressive and abusive in some type of way. I was just like, not okay. And then from that on, I just had like, I was very like, I can't even find the word to say, but I would say I was very protective over myself. After going through something so traumatic in that way and never forgetting it, I really became protective over myself. So I left that relationship. I didn't date. I think at the time I was like 17, 18 years old. I wasn't seeing anyone for literally till my senior year of high school. Ended up meeting a guy that friends connected me to. Ended up being with that guy for 7 years. Met him my senior year of high school. We were together all through college. And here comes the story as to like where Jesus comes back into my life. So all through this, I'm blaming God. I'm blaming myself just because of like brokenness throughout my life, right? And I even forgot to mention earlier, but like through everything that was happening because of my childhood, I was depressed. I was mentally suicidal, but my parents didn't know. No one knew because they just kept throwing things my way, or they were like, you need to stop being so emotional. And all the time I kept being told like, you need to stop being so emotional. You need to stop crying, or, worse things are gonna happen to you, or like all these things, right? So that's like, I guess like hidden trauma, right? That's like silent. It's been pushed down. It's been put in the pit of your stomach, but like you cannot be yourself. You cannot show emotion. You cannot show vulnerability. And so I had these huge walls up of the only person that can keep me safe is me. The only person that can protect myself is myself. And for a long, long time, I believed that, even in different dating situations as a teenager, until I met my boyfriend that I was with for 7 years. I kid you not, thought he was the man I was gonna marry. He was the person I was gonna have kids with and start a family and all of these things. But God has a funny way of working things around, right? So in the process that we were together, a lot of great things happened in our relationship, but also a lot of messy things happened in our relationship. And I definitely don't put blame by any means on any one of these situations, because I think it falls on two people, right? However, in that process, I just started feeling disconnected. I was trying to figure out who I was. I was in fashion school. I was living the dream, going to fashion shows, meeting people, connecting with people, networking. And that was the highlight of my life, was living in New York City at the time, going to fashion school, studying, running around to Condé Nast building and Cosmopolitan and Hearst building, and like all these places, and like dropping off samples. It was just like, I felt like the devil wears Prada, But in that process, I felt that I was very unhappy. I felt this weight of like, I was never good enough. And I felt this weight of my life was going nowhere. But I was in college. I was in my 3rd year of college. And 3rd year of college, met this girl. I remember we were in the same class in textiles. Beautiful girl. And I kept staring at her. I'm like, this girl is just so pretty. Like, who is this girl? Like, she looks like she could potentially be famous. Maybe she's a celebrity. All these things. So I'm like, literally like obsessed with this girl because she's just so pretty. And I'm like, she had this big curly Texas hair, and is now my dearest sister and best friend. And I always say she is like literally the angel God sent me at the right time. But I remember we bumped into each other in the admissions office because we were both talking to our counselors in admission, and I complimented her shoes, and she said, "Oh my gosh, it's the best!" And so from there on, like, we complimented each other's shoes, and we became best friends after that. But it all started with her inviting me to a service, and I remember she had asked me, she's like, "What are you doing on Sunday?" And it's like, "Oh, well, I probably am just gonna work and like do homework and like, prep for like midterms and like all this stuff." And she's like, "Would you like to come to like church with me?" And I remember I looked at her and I like smirked with like that sarcastic smirk. I was like, "Are you crazy? Are you really asking me to go to church with you?" I told her, I was like, the last time I was at church service was literally for a funeral. So I was like, "I'm not going to church." Then she goes, "It's not what you think." She's like, "I think you should give it a shot. And she's like, "I promise if you absolutely hate it, I will never ask you again." And I was like, in that moment, I don't know what told me to say yes, but I was just like, I was so unhappy with my life that I genuinely was just like, what do I really have to lose by not going to a church service? The only thing I would lose is my time, right? So I ended up being Hillsong, New York City, and I got saved that day. I literally remember just being in that room, and they played Cornerstone. And when they hit the bridge, all I just felt was like chills down my spine. And I just started weeping and like crying. And I was like, I haven't cried like this in such a long time. So I'm like over here crying. And I remember I just felt a hand touch my shoulder, like very firmly. But when I looked around me, there was no one in sight. It was like, is what I call a Holy Ghost experience or a Holy Spirit experience, right? And that's really what I felt. And no one could tell me otherwise from that. And within, I think, 6 months to the year, I decided to actually get baptized. And I got baptized in 2014. I got saved in 2013. So it's within like a year apart. And that's when Jesus changed my life. In that process, I don't know, like I just felt like honestly in that process, I didn't know what was next. All I knew is I was very confused about everything. I was questioning my life. I was questioning my relationship at that time. I was questioning the way I was saying things, how I was doing things. I was questioning my family. There was just so many things I was questioning. And I remember my best friend, her dad, actually for my birthday, gifted me my first Bible, which is today, like, my Bible is literally falling apart, poor thing. It's good, it's a good thing, but it's also like horrible because like I can't even take it anywhere because everywhere I take it, it's like peeling in pieces on like my clothes, wherever I leave it. So I have to get it rebound, but it's just to say, like, out of all of that, I feel like I completely was transformed. And for the first time in my existence, I was asking questions that I never asked before. And it allowed me to get closer to God. Like, it drew me in. He romanced me. He wooed me. He awed me in ways that I was very taken back. Like, what I'm feeling, like even questioning, like, what I'm feeling, is this real? Like, is this, like, what am I feeling? Is this normal? Like, even asking my friends who grew up Christian or, grew up in the faith as pastors' kids or like Bible camp or all these things, right? Like, all this language was so new to me. I'm like, what is worship? I was like, all I know is hymns. It's like, all I know is him. So I was like, I didn't even know what worship music was. And like, even understanding the dynamic and the framework of worship and Sabbath and all these new terminology that I was just like so, like, such a baby to, you know? I had no idea what they were. And needless to say, like, in that process of being wooed and awed by him, I remember just taking the time to journal more. And that's something I hadn't done, in all honesty. Like, I finally started journaling when I became a Christian. When I gave my life to Jesus, this was the first time I actually started expressing my emotions on paper. And I remember just like sitting, like sometimes hours, just journaling, like pages and pages. And then there's sometimes where I would be like, I don't even know what to say. I was like, God, I just know I have a pen in my hand and the paper's in front of me, and I'm like, I don't even know what to write down. And slowly but surely, there was just like a lot that started spilling out. And I didn't realize how much was spilling out until like I would go back and I would read, and I was going through the motions of each season and understanding why my life felt so difficult, why it felt so hard, and even just growing, right? Because I think we have this tendency of like thinking like, oh, the moment we get baptized, like our life completely transforms in a day. It's like, no, it's actually a transformational process on a daily. And it doesn't stop. Like, you know, we say it in our church all the time, but it's also biblically spoken that we're going to continue to work until we get to heaven. And when we get to heaven, there's still going to be work to be done, you know? So that has overall just been something that I've been chewing on for the longest time. And I remember my darkest moments when I was like questioning my family dynamics in so many different areas, even my relationship at the time. So mind you, like, I just gave my life to Jesus. I'm in this secular world relationship. I was living with my boyfriend at the time and felt this huge conviction of like, I can't live with him anymore. And this happened, that for me, that happened in a day. Not even, like, I would say maybe within a week. Like, it was just like in my head. It was in my head. And the pit of my stomach was in knots. And I remember just like thinking like, but God, this is like the person I've been with for 7 years. Like, this is a person. And then I just remember just like thinking, we're like hearing the word of like not being equally yoked and not understanding what that meant. And so like, that's when the arguments started to happen, because now I'm so curious and so in awe of like, who is this God? Like, who is this God? Who is Jesus? Who are the apostles? Like, you know, like, who are the saints, as I would call them? Because, right, like, in being Catholic, I just knew the saints. I didn't know the apostles, the disciples. Like, that was just literally the language that I had to change my verbiage to. And so I had all these questions, and I'm like bursting like with fumes out of my ears of like, I need to know more. I need to learn more. I need to understand more. I want to walk this out. Like, truly, I really want to walk this out. And so for me, I just started having all these convictions of like my worldly relationships. I started having all these convictions of like, you know, me wanting not to live anymore. Me saying like, I just don't deserve to be on earth. Like, talk to myself in that way, because for so long I was spoken to like in a way of I was never good enough, or that I would never be anything because of who my father was, or because of the decisions my dad made. And over the last few years has been that revelation of healing for me, of like, man, like, I didn't realize of how much things just started to bubble up because of what I went through as a kid and as a teenager and as a young adult, you know? Needless to say, I didn't know where my life was going. All I knew is like, I was chasing after God. All I knew is like, I don't know what you have in store for me, but I want to lean into this thing wholeheartedly. And I don't know what that's going to look like. And so after a period of time of being at Hillsong, I served on team. I was part of it's called Info Bar. Before, or at our church, it would be the Connect Corner. And then I was part of stage team, believe it or not. I actually was part of stage team. And so I served on stage team for 2.5 years. And I was part of Info Bar for 2 years. So I was there like a total 4 years. Ended up leaving Hillsong. I just felt something in my spirit of like, it's time to move. There was just certain, I don't know, I feel like it was a spirit prompting of like, your time here is up. You need to leave. I just didn't feel like comfortable. There was just parts of me which was like, I didn't feel safe in the community. And not to say that I didn't have amazing people around me, because I did. As like my Connect group that I had were all these amazing women of God. We would meet on, I think it was actually on Tuesdays or Wednesday or something like that. But we would meet in this small, tiny little apartment on the Upper West Side, and we would do movie nights, and we would go to Central Park and have picnics during the summer. It was like the dream. But genuinely, overall, just like serving the church and the community, I just didn't feel it anymore. And I was just like, I feel like I'm craving something deeper. And so I left and I went to the smaller church in Chelsea called Trinity Grace Church. And I loved it. It was a small congregation of maybe like 250, maybe 300 people. And it felt like a family. It was only one service. After service was done, we would all stay and just like talk for hours, and then all of us would go to dinner, and it was just like a whole evening of just like being around family. And I remember the first time in that very moment, I was like, this is what family looks like. But it was like more of a question. And so finding confusion, right? Because my framework of what family looked like was so opposite of what God's family looks like, right? And so I remember just having those questions and like, man, is this really what family looks like? Because it's beautiful, and it's giving me weird feelings like that I couldn't explain. So I think that's really where the framework for family started to come up in my life. And also being surrounded by my best friend and her family, because her dad is a pastor in Texas, and they're Filipino, and they come from a large family. And so even just being around her family allowed me to see for the first time, what does a real healthy family dynamic look like? And it just taught me so much. Yeah.